Right, let's have a moment of silence before we begin, please.
You're gonna leave us in prayer.
Yeah. Right, hello listeners, and welcome to episode 47 of the Picky Bastards podcast, where we talk about newly released albums, old albums, and other albums, and get everything wrong about all of them. You may have been listening last time and realised that regular bastard Nick Parker is no longer going to be hosting the podcast. So we are welcoming Mr. Sam Atkins in his place today and going forward. How are you doing, Sam?
Hi, I'm good.
How are you feeling about being the new Nick?
Oh, please don't say that. I could never be Nick. I could never reach those highs of tearing apart a piece of music like Nick can.
Okay.
So yeah.
Hopefully you will inflict less sort of doom metal on us than Nick did, though, which is a definite bonus.
Maybe, but you have no idea what I've got planned in the future for you two.
Country music on the way.
I was going to say, it's going to be a different kind of torture.
Yeah. Melodies. Welcome some melodies to the podcast, though, at last. I imagine we'll get more melodies with Sam in the room.
Yeah.
So I was just saying before we started recording that I always try and insult Sam in some way. Last time I called him a lodger. When he was first a guest, we called him a special guest, but then we've downgraded it every time. So I'm trying to think what he is now. Are you a piece of furniture? Are you a stool?
Just there.
Yeah.
Just
what? I'm going to call you a stool.
Okay, that's fine. I'll be a stool.
Okay. Sam is our new stool. So today we will be, as always, talking about 4 recently released albums. One a classic album, and I'll be introducing an artist I love. So the recently released albums are Montero by Lil Nas X, Comfort to Me by Amyl and the Sniffers, Before I Get to Phoenix by Injury Reserve, New Age Norms Free by Cold War Kids, and the classic is In My Own Time by Karen Dalton. And then at the end, I'll be telling you why I love Roots Manuva. So I'm going to go to Sam first with a question. Which album felt like it was most part of a musical movement or legacy?
Yeah, so it wasn't hard to pick this answer to this question. It feels like to me that Montero by Lil Nas X is the musical movement of right now. Like this feels the most relevant current kind of music that we could have picked for the podcast to represent 2021 and what music sounds like to so many people. So whether this becomes a thing that will have a legacy, that's to be decided. I don't know. But for me right now, this is like one of the most kind of, I wouldn't say important, but like it's just relevant. Relevant is the word, I feel. As kind of an out gay black pop star, I just can't think of anyone else that's kind of taken on the world like Lil Nas X has, and kind of in pop culture, in his music videos, in all of that bit. And I feel like this album really, really tries to kind of sum that up. And I feel like as a debut, it is infinitely better than the first kind of music that he first put out a couple of years ago in like an EP form, which felt like it was very much, we're still trying to chase kind of some sort of trend, not really sure what sort of artist I'm going to be. Clearly hadn't found himself really personally. And I think this is an album that features ridiculously massive pop tunes, ridiculously massive pop hooks, like Industry Baby, Montero, That's What I Want, Scoop. These are huge hit songs and they sound like it as well. And I feel like there's kind of no one that's doing that sort of thing at his level right now, of these kind of young artists that are in the mainstream so much as him. I really, really like this album. I think it definitely has some issues as a kind of record, and I wonder whether those issues will kind of increase over time for listeners, and whether this will remain kind of a standout moment for him. I feel like he's at his best when he's sort of rapping / singing, not really doing either, because I think when there's quite a few features on this record, and I want to pick out specifically Megan Thee Stallion, who delivers the best rap verse on the whole album, which is kind of a shame, because it's like, well, someone else is delivering the best moment on your own album. And the same with Miley. I feel like Miley, right at the end of the album, she way out sings him, and it's those moments you go, he's not quite there yet as a singer, and he's not quite there yet as a rapper. But when he's doing this kind of bit in between, on things like Industry Baby, I feel like it really works for him, and that's when he's at his kind of most solid. I feel like this is it's a really interesting one, because it's got those pop moments, but it's also really introspective. It's really honest and open. I don't think that like lots of people would have expected this from such a mainstream pop star, but this is as honest as you would get from him talking about things on his own Twitter or on Instagram or something. It feels like it's the same thing. Like when he's speaking about his family, and he's talking directly to like his abusive mother, and on Dead Right Now, it's really like that. I think that's the second track on the album, and it's really kind of surprising that you get such a heavy moment on an otherwise massive pop record. So yeah, I really, really liked this, and for me, it is kind of the moment right now. It is the talking point of kind of this year, and that's why I feel like it fits with that question. Yeah,
good argument. I'm not gonna argue with that. Matt, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do. I 100% agree with Sam on this. I wrote down it's like a distillation of the zeitgeist right now. It felt very much like he's getting all these ideas from all these different places, which are all over pop, and then bringing them all together into just one record. And so that meant the record as a whole evolved in its style throughout, but it still sounded kind of like very much him, because he was very much has this unique way of presenting himself and being at the center of the songs. Even when you do get these features, and like you said, Megan Thee Stallion absolutely bossed it, but it still sounded like his song. I found it really interesting, because it really wasn't what I was expecting. Like, I didn't know anything about his music apart from Old Town Road, so I was expecting like hip hop country fusion, and then it was just like, oh, this is just like just pop bangers, like nonstop. And there's so many earworms, so many songs that just stuck in my head. And even though it might not be like, I think the groundbreaking part about it is like who he is, being like on top of the world, and not necessarily the music. The music, like there were lots of motifs and things that I've heard a lot of this before. It doesn't sound that revolutionary, apart from like the way he's putting it together is interesting. But the actual music itself, like I'd heard a lot of it before, but it was irresistible. I found I really just like had a lot of fun listening to the record. So yeah, I definitely surprised me, but enjoyed it.
Okay. Right. Well, yeah, obviously I was aware of Lil Nas X, as you know, he's been everywhere recently, and I have really respected him as a person, the stances he's been making, and the videos, you know, how controversial he's been on purpose to sort of wind up people who I think really do need winding up. So I've enjoyed that about him. But I really didn't expect to like his music at all, especially after hearing Old Town Road, which is, you know, horrible. But I did want to check out the album because I was interested in him, and I expected it to be a total cheese fest. But I was really genuinely surprised to find often quite a hard-hitting album, actually, and a really well-produced record as well. I think there are times, like songs like Industry Baby, where this actually has more in common with some of the hip hop of today than it does with the pop realm I was sort of expecting it to be in. And I think, songs that have been mentioned before, like Scoop and $sign Slime, I think they really go quite full throttle, and I really enjoy that energy. I also I assume everyone would think I would hate Lost in the Citadel, but I did actually really enjoy that song. But there are other tracks I like less, like the one with Elton John, for example. But there aren't any moments when the album's really unlistenable to me, which I kind of expected it might be. But yeah, you've both said this, and I think what really holds it together is him. I think his lyrics are surprisingly thoughtful. It feels like he's really putting himself out there. And as Sam pointed out, it's really refreshing to hear someone in his position talking so openly about the sexuality. And I think Matt used the word revolutionary, and I think there is something really revolutionary about this record and what he's doing at times. Again, that is about him, not necessarily the music, but what he's doing is quite revolutionary, and I think that's really to be respected. So yeah, I do come away from it with quite a lot of respect for him. I think he's killing it. He's absolutely smashing it and doing incredibly well and making good music, which I didn't expect. It's not an album I'm going to rush back to, but I am really glad we picked it because I would not have listened to it, I don't think, otherwise. And I think it deserves a good listen because it's interesting and he is interesting. So yeah, I'm glad we covered it. So yeah, I didn't expect such round agreement on that record when we picked it at first, but
I think I was surprised that it went deeper than just the singles as well. Like there's a lot of just good album tracks all the way down.
Yeah. I think one thing you picked out, Fran, you mentioned the production, and I think it's interesting that like a debut album like this, you kind of maybe would have expected loads of people wanting to work with him, but he's pretty much made the whole record with this one production team, Take a Day Trip, who did a couple of his other songs before, and they've kind of become a go-to producer in kind of pop, hip-hop, that kind of thing. So you hear that little thing at the start of the song on all sorts of other songs now, but they've pretty much done the whole record with him, and I feel like that makes it a lot more cohesive. Because it could easily have been all of these killer producers right now trying to get in on this. It doesn't end up as that. It's very much his record, which I feel like is the best part of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it feels like a piece, doesn't it? And I think sometimes when you get, sometimes when we've covered artists like this before, it does feel very, all over the place. And it doesn't feel all over the place. It feels, even though there's a lot of different styles and a lot of different genres being touched upon, it does feel cohesive still. So yeah, it makes sense that it's the same production. Yeah.
That's cool.
Cool. Okay. Next question.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt. So which album felt most out on its own?
So I'm going to go with the Karen Dalton album, which I've forgotten the name of right now.
In my own time? In your own time? In my own time.
In my own time.
Neither of you picked the answers that I predicted you would, but go ahead.
I found this one really hard to pick because I thought a lot of them were not really standing out from the genres that they habit within.
Interesting.
This for me, like, it fused genres in a way I hadn't really heard before. Like, it's obviously folk forward, but there's like blues, gospel, and jazz all chucked in at different times. And there's even at one point I felt like there was like a disco moment on One Night of Love. The guitar in it sounds like disco guitars with like I don't know, they're like kind of rapid strumming, and they're like the tone of the guitar. And so I was just like, what is going on? But then it would always come back to like the folk core at the center of it. And so I guess one part of that, though, is when it's fusing all these different genres, is I wouldn't be surprised if it's taking these genres and these influences from other artists and putting them together in a way which has been done. It's just probably a black artist that's been overlooked. But I really don't know anything about this time period musically. Like you made me. I volunteered to listen to like Dylan extensively for the first time only a couple months ago. So like it's a time period I really don't know much about, but I did I broadly enjoyed this album. It had some like very beautiful simplicity at times. It was very big and romantic for a lot of it, and as she like spanned through these genres, it was interesting enough to talk about it after Lil Nas X, because the way that she fused genres wasn't like cohesive. I don't think it was very much like, here's a song, and now here's a completely different type of song, and here's a completely different other type of song. And I don't know if that's the nature of the way it was recorded or anything like that, but like initially I was expecting this very like straightforward folk. The first couple of songs are very straightforward folk, but then it's going all over the place, and it is very much stepwise as opposed to like this nice fusion throughout. I think the moments I enjoyed the most were the ones that weren't that folky. I actually found her voice kind of irritating, like it was so nasally during, especially the first couple tracks. It sounded like she was a Muppet, and I just, I know this is like a legendary album, but I'm just like, it was so like almost like a parody song. But then it moved into more like the bluesy, jazzy stuff, and I was like, I could really enjoy some of that because she let her vocals sit much back, like further back in the track. And so yeah, I like. Overall, I thought lots of some interesting songs, some good songs, but I'm not sure as an album as a whole. I was like sold on the whole thing, but maybe I'll make a playlist like we've been doing recently.
Can we all stop turning albums into playlists, people? It's not allowed. Not allowed.
Yeah.
I'll jump in, I think, because there's a few things Matt said that I just need to tell him he's wrong about, I suppose. But yeah, to go back to, you mentioned Dylan, and the reason I picked this album was partly because I knew she'd sung with Dylan a bit. There was an association there. I also picked it because there's a documentary about her on the way, and I know I'm going to have to watch it because my partner, Kirsten, really likes Karen Dalton, particularly the opening song, Something on Your Mind, which you've just slagged off, which is an absolutely stunningly beautiful song. That song, I've known that song for a long time because Kirsten listens to it. And it's a gorgeous song. I meant to check her out, so it felt like a good time to pick her. But when I picked it, I wasn't aware that this is all cover songs, and everything she ever released was a cover song. She never actually released any of her original music, which might be where you're getting some of that, incohesiveness from. And my first reaction to it being all covers was a bit of disappointment, really, because I felt like I wasn't sure how to judge an album that wasn't really like her original work. But after spending some time with it, it turned out that didn't really matter to me at all, because I just think she's such a unique artist and performer that it didn't really matter that these weren't her songs. I'm going to use a massive cliche here, but she really did make all of these songs her own, I thought. I know, a massive cliche, but I really do think she did. I think there's only 2 or 3 that I know in their original form, and they sounded like completely different songs. And it's my understanding that she arranged all the new compositions of all these songs, and that with her very unique voice and the intonations, she did make everything sound very different. And there's songs that I did know, like When a Man Loves a Woman and How Sweet It Is. These versions were much more in my wheelhouse than any versions I'd heard before. So, yeah, totally captivated by this album, to be honest. I really enjoyed it. I have got a note here saying I can imagine her voice being a Marmite one. I can imagine some people really not getting on board with it, but for me personally, I find it quite transfixing. I found the sound of her voice quite ethereal, and I think she often makes these sweet and sort of sickly songs in their original form a lot more haunting. And what really impressed me as well is I don't think it sounds that dated for an album that I think came out in 1979. I think it's kind of timeless. If someone like Angel Olsen came out with an album like this today, it wouldn't surprise me. So yeah, in terms of the classics we've done, this is up there with the ones I've listened to the most, with possibly Nas and Biggie having been listened to more. But yeah, I will keep listening to this. I really, really enjoyed this album. One of the best classics we've had for quite a long time.
I think it's older than 79. I wrote 71 down, but maybe I wrote down the wrong thing.
No, you might well be right, mate. Yeah, I knew there was a 7 in there. So that's as far as I got. You might be right. Sam, where'd you land?
Okay, so I don't really have much to say about this album. I haven't written that much down. I expect both of you expect this to be one of my favourites on this list, because it feels like it's kind of in my wheelhouse of kind of country folk, kind of, there's loads of steel guitar and a lot of it, and I really liked the instrumentation. It felt very earthy to me, but I am so glad that you pointed out her voice, Matt, before I was able to, because it was an absolute deal breaker for me, and I never want to listen to her sing again, because it's just so off-putting. And especially when there's songs on here that we all know. So like How Sweet It Is and When a Man Loves a Woman, you pointed them out. There is no one I wouldn't rather hear sing those songs than Karen Dalton now, because I feel like it ruined those songs for me. I actually don't mind those songs. It's just, and that was kind of it. That was all I kind of ended up getting from it. I was desperately trying to get everything else out of this album because it really should appeal to me. But I just can't get past her voice. And that feels awful because it's like, clearly she's talented with her instrumentation and the way she arranges these songs. But if her voice sounds like that, I can't go back. So
it's definitely a Marmite voice. I was definitely right in that then.
It's like When a Man Loves a Woman sounds like Kermit the Frog.
It sounds like someone
doing
taking the piss. Like it sounds like kind of like Thingio doing pub singer kind of thing of like where it's
I'm
like.
really glad that you two are the ones saying this because she's got a massive fan base and it's not
absolutely, and
they can on Twitter for once.
they can come for me all they want. That's fine.
Yeah.
I know I'm totally in the wrong here, but that is just for me. That is for me what I think.
That's when I do the tweets, and that's the only quote from you I'm going to take out.
I didn't say the Muppet quote. That's on Matt.
I'm owning that. I don't care.
I'm surprised that you're both so negative on it. Actually, I thought I would probably be the one who liked it the most. I'm surprised to hear the negativity.
The music's really it's good, and I didn't realize it was all covers and. The instrumentation, like you say, it is adding a new twist to a bunch of songs that are a bit much.
Yeah.
But she's at her best when she's not pushing her voice.
Yeah.
In my opinion. It's when she's sat back and almost, it's not sultry, but it's almost like angling that way.
Fair enough. I'll allow it. All right, are we done on Karen? I'm going to take us to Cold War Kids because I just feel like the sooner we talk about it, the less I have to think about it.
Let's get it out.
I'll start us off. So, Cold War Kids are actually a band that are on the. I've got a list of possible bands and artists to feature on the Why I Love section at the end of our podcast, and Cold War Kids are actually on there. I wouldn't be creating a playlist though. I'd just be looking at their 2007 album. Robbers and Cowards, which is an absolutely stunking album. I love it. It was an absolute massive album for me for years after it came out, and I saw them live 4 or 5 times off the back of it. And when this was picked, which Matt, I think you picked this.
I did.
When this was picked, my first instinct was to go back and listen to Robbers and Cowards because I hadn't heard it in years. So I went back and listened to that and thought, this is a great band. I'm quite looking forward to hearing them after all this time. And it did not take me long to realise that it's not the same band anymore. The opening song, I can't remember the name of it, but it's an absolute mess. Total stadium rock, Coldplay-esque, horrible nightmare. And while the album never really plunges quite to those depths again, it doesn't really rise high above them either. I was even convinced for a while that they didn't have the same vocalist anymore because he never used to sound quite so much like a chipmunk. But he does now. But then there's the song Times Have Changed, which is the only one on this album that hints at being the same band and vocalist from Cold War Kids, the band that I used to love. But even this veers off to something really cheesy towards the end. And I don't have loads more to say other than I wish I hadn't listened to this. It's definitely soured my thoughts on a band that I was really a big fan of for quite a while. So I'm not very happy that you picked it, Matt. That's my final comment, really. Who wants to go?
I go for it, Sam.
I'll jump in first, just because we'll leave you to last, Matt. If you picked it, you inflicted this on us. My first note that I wrote is this is like music written for teeth whitening ads. So because I have no reference point for Cold War Kids, never heard of them, no reference. I can't remember anyone mentioning them before. So I went into this completely blind, and I got from this album exactly your description of your experience of being a fan of them and then listening to this album, Fran, where it sounds like a band that used to be really good and now after having huge success and playing bigger and bigger venues, felt like they needed to write music that bands that were playing those bigger venues make.
Yeah.
But the Coldplay link is so obvious, and I got One Republic as well as a link as some these kind of bands that clearly are playing bigger and bigger places and need songs that supposedly will be bigger and bigger in those, but no one really wants to hear those new ones. But the advantage those two bands have is they seem to actually be able to write pop songs that fit with that. Whereas these guys, I don't know who signed off these songs, like who listened to them and went, that's a great pop hook. Yeah. Just keep saying I Can't Walk Away over and over again. And then that's fine. And that'll get people into this album. Every single song just feels like it's just so generic. And it kind of like, weirdly, it was one of the least like offensive albums to me on this playlist. But that was its biggest problem, is that it was just like there. And it just, the songs are just meaningless. There's no depth at all to any of it. It all sounds so overblown, and yet doesn't say anything. So it's so like in the middle that it becomes just something you never want to go back to. So yeah, I wasn't a fan of this.
Do we know if there's a New Age Norms 1 and 2 as well? Because
I think this is a trilogy. Yeah.
Fuck me, man.
It's been 3 years and a new album each year.
Yeah. Okay.
And I vaguely remember listening to maybe the first one and being like, oh, this is kind of poppy. They've changed. But I didn't give it any time. And then when this came out, I was like, oh.
What sort of music did they make before? Because I've not reference point.
They used to be part of like the New York scene of the mid 2000s, where they'd like be with bands like the Walkmen and the National, and they'd be the kind of bands that are playing small venues, drink too much whiskey, and like exercise their demons and existential dread through like just this clattering music.
Yeah, I'd say Robbers and Cowards is quite a hard album to sum up as well, because it's obviously indie, it's obviously rock, but it's got a real sort of rawness to it as well. It's I saw them in a tiny venue in Sheffield called the Lead Mill, and it's just a lot of energy, quite aggressive, quite dark lyrics, but quite funny lyrics, and just really sort of crunchy, interesting songs, which this is not.
It is really dirty and loud, and like they're on the edge of just falling apart, both physically and emotionally. Like, and
now they have.
This is just clean and caged, and they've been very good at making hugely forgettable pop rock. That's what they've succeeded with this, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, like you mentioned Coldplay, right? I also, there were moments that sounded like full on Take That and things. Like, just full totally. Generic pop.
But done
like,
badly as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like Take That, masters at doing that. They will sell stadiums and people love it, and everyone, like, they've made some songs that are people's anthems. I'm like, no one's going to be like, oh, this is going to be our wedding song. This song, it's going to symbolize this.
But the idea that we were even thinking about Cold War Kids as someone who might be aiming for a wedding song is so depressing to me. Like, no one was going to play any of that music from Robbers and Cowards at a wedding, was it? Because it was like dark and
maybe
sweaty.
A funeral.
But,
Well, Well, I would be. I want you to do Robbers and Cowards because it is one of the best albums of the time.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
And they were one of the best live acts. I'd be
Did we see them, Matt?
I would. I'm
Together?
not sure if we've seen them. I've seen
I saw
them
when
at
I was at
several
uni,
festivals.
Yeah.
I'd be super interested to see them now, to see what they've become.
I would not. And kind of the interesting thing Sam was saying about how they've started to write songs for bigger crowds, I think it does sound like that, but I don't think their crowds ever got big.
Yeah.
So I think they'd still be singing to a room about the size of the Lead Mill, but now it'd be empty.
Full of people complaining they're not doing their old stuff.
Yeah, just be those people at the back singing, hang me up to dry. And that would be all you would hear.
The second album's good as well.
The second album was decent as well, yeah. Kind of fell off after that, but they fell very far for this one. Okay, we have 2 albums
Cool.
left, don't we?
Yeah.
Sam, which of the 2 that we have left do you hate the most?
Oh, what a question!
I already know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't like either of them, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
I'm going to go with the obvious answer, which is Amyl and the Sniffers. And
Yeah.
I am not happy that you guys made me listen to this. You won't be surprised. Like, I wouldn't have been able to kid either of you by saying that I liked it. It's absolutely not for me. And I don't want to listen to an Australian woman shout at me for 35 minutes. And that is what this album is. I was searching for some sort of lyrical depth. I was searching for some sort of like something else beneath that. But it kind of just sounds like by the numbers. Look how different I am. Look how weird we are. You can all just fuck off. And it's like that's it. That's the level that we're at for 35 minutes. And I realized that there's literally a song that's probably aimed at me. I Don't Need a Cunt Like You to Love Me, which is an amazing song title. And it's like a minute. I can't even think what the song, if it is even a song, it's just there and then disappears. Like so much of this, where everything's like 2 minutes and then it's gone. And then the next song starts and it sounds exactly like the last one. So I just don't know what you're supposed to get from this. It feels like this is, I went in probably expecting it to be a bit more on the on like the post-punk side. I don't know why, but I just with the albums that you usually pick for these things, but this is like rock, like straight down the line. It felt it didn't feel as didn't feel like it was saying anything, which I feel like those albums, at least me saying I don't like those other albums, they're at least saying something, and like lyrically they're giving something, and it's great that that's happening. But this, it was like, is this all? Are we just going to say fuck off to the crowd? Like that's what it feels like you're just going to do to me for 30 minutes at your gig. And yeah, I got nothing else from it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say you're not predictable, but
I'm so predictable.
that was yeah. I've even included you in my notes. But Matt, do you want to jump in, or shall I?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned post-punk, and yeah, this isn't that. Like I feel like there's a lot of bands doing the post-punk thing at the moment, and so I found this very refreshing to listen to like some actual proper punk rock, and it doesn't deviate much from like the forebearers of that genre, but that doesn't mean it's not still vital. I don't think. For me, I thought this album was very fun. It was goofy in places. Some of the like images she was conjuring up were very, very funny. But then I have listened to I think they have a previous EP or something.
Yeah, they do.
I think they have got much better since that previous album. I think the riffs are catchier. I think the storytelling is actually a little bit better. Like it's not quite which is the track where she's trying to get into a club.
Security.
That's not Security. It's not quite Arctic Monkey levels of storytelling, but it still conjures up an image in your brain, and you can feel that energy that she's bringing to that moment. And it's very, very relatable. And yeah, I often like. There's a lot of things that are like classic within like punk rock, like the way they drop the guitars and stuff like that, and it quiets down, and then it like really picks up again, and it keeps like just switching gears in like a very a way that just keeps you engaged, keeps the energy up, prevents it from being one complete monotone. And I think a lot of the things where they're saying "fuck you," I think it's more actually, it's not. I read it as more like a feminist angle as opposed to just "fuck you" as the audience in general. Like she is in a more unique position as a female lead to a band, specifically within punk rock, which is mostly male dominated. And I think that's really exemplified by songs like Knifey, where she's talking about self-defense and having to have a knife to defend herself, but then also making it super jarring by giving it a cute name.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot, considering its simplicity, there's a lot more going on. But you could just read it as "fuck you, you're listening to me, and this is just punk rock, so fuck you." Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we all do this when we're setting the podcast questions, but I always pick my questions based on something that's occurred to me while I've been listening. And the reason I asked Sam about the musical movement or legacy question is because this is the purest and most successful version of a punk album I've heard in quite a long time. It's not, I'm not talking post-punk, I'm talking just pure unadulterated punk music. It's got all the hallmarks. It's fast, it's relentless, it's loud, it's politically charged, it is funny, and for me it makes me want to get in a room and just throw myself around a bit, and it is also pretty empowering and anthemic. I think it's just all in all a great example of a punk album. I picked it because I've been seeing their name around for a few years and I've been meaning to check them out, but I expected something more in the sort of vein of Sleaford Mods because I know they're associated with that band quite a bit. So I was expecting something a bit electronic and sort of post-punky, Billy No Mates type stuff. But there's no gimmicks here. It's just guitars, percussion, and a really furious vocalist. I enjoyed the whole thing, but Don't Fence Me In and Knifey were two of the most typical and enjoyable punk songs. They're not subtle. They're not politically nuanced, but they really, really slam their message home. While there's a lot to be said for a cleverly constructed argument in a song, there's also nothing wrong with just getting to the point in the way that they do here. I also really enjoyed some of the funny songs like Security and Maggot. Maggot's hilarious. I really want to go and see this band live. And just to react to something that Matt was saying around her being a female lead in a band like this. I can't remember the name of the song, but there's one song where she talks about, I'm still a hot girl if I'm acting daggy and all that. And I can't remember the name of the song, but it feels like that was a reaction. I don't know if all of you saw it, but they did a live stream and, you could see the outline of her genitals in her trousers in the video. And it just, Twitter and Facebook just went mental about it, just really abusive towards her. And I feel like that song came out of that. So I think it shows that even I can understand people hearing this kind of music and not really getting, it does sound like just a fuck you, but the fuck you comes from somewhere. And I think in that particular instance, I think it's a really strong reaction to an incident like that. But all of that said, the main thing I enjoyed while listening to this was thinking about Sam sitting at home
Thanks.
with his first playlist as a permanent host and hating every second of this album. That certainly made me smile quite a lot while I was thinking about it.
This was one of the most one of the albums that we've done on all the podcasts I've ever done where David has come in, my partner David has come into the room and said, please, can you turn this off? The most. Because, it was so clearly all the time we talk about music, something I want to listen to. Tell us that David comes in and... Exactly.
My
so
only
you know
picture
how
of
many
David
times
is David coming and closing the door.
Exactly.
But it's nice to know that you don't just hate shouty man music, though.
Oh, I know shouty woman music too.
It's
everyone, all the shouty people need to just sit down for a bit.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Well, one album left, I think. Is that right? Injury Reserve?
Yeah.
Matt, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I found this album I found it interesting, I guess. I think there was a really interesting atmosphere. I think when I first saw the cover art for this, I instantly thought about The Thing, the movie, because it's very much akin to the movie. And that movie is all about atmosphere. It's all about this sinister tone throughout. And that very much echoed what was happening in the album. It almost weirdly reminded me of when we listened to last year, the Keller Chris and Chris Keys album, in the sense that the atmosphere was so vital to it. But instead of it having a warm, fuzzy summer vibe, this was just dark, overbearing, and doom-filled. In Superman, the glitchy vibes that was throughout the song made it feel like there was scrambling desperation behind the actual the vocals, and it it made it like I enjoy, like I took a lot from listening to it, but I wouldn't say it was enjoyable. And like he's repeating this line, "Ain't no saving me or you," while this is all happening. It just feels very like despairing. I think as an album as a whole, I much prefer the first half. I think it starts to get disorienting after that. The kind of loses this direction, and it becomes a little bit less coherent. But then at the end, the final song, you kind of it refines itself, and there's like this repeating drony synth that sound, which is almost optimistic, but it feels like after all this like cloud of darkness, which is especially the latter half of the album, which does feel a bit more nebulous, it feels like they found their way again almost. I mean, maybe I'm just reading way too much into this, but it's just like the feeling of the music itself, and like it matches the lyrics as well. I think like he's saying the show must go on. He's saying he's been caught by a storm and it's raining really hard right now, but he's got to go on. And so like as an album as a whole, I liked it. I just it wasn't like so many of these albums that we covered are like good time vibes. And so it really wasn't that. And so it made it a very challenging listen.
Okay. I'll jump in because Sam's already kind of give us a hint how he feels about this.
Yeah.
So, but in all honesty, I've been all over the place with this album. I kind of went into it absolutely wanting to love it. I discovered their previous LP earlier this year and really enjoyed that. But despite having some oddball elements in that album, it was a much more straightforward hip-hop album than this is. And then I was really initially very surprised by how abstract and experimental a project by the time I get to Phoenix is. But that also really excited me at first. It felt really dynamic, really creative. But also it felt like an album that was going to take some time to fully get my head around. But then over the first sort of 5 or 6 listens, I found that my interest wasn't really developing in the way that I thought it would. I began to think maybe it was a little too abstract for me to fully connect with it. But then again, that has changed over time. I think the basic issue is that this isn't an album you can passively consume. It's not an album you can really appreciate while listening in the background while you're working or you're cooking. It's just too dense or obtuse for that. But when I was able to give it time, I found it really darkly fascinating and really intriguing. I think it's got so much going on and it never really stays still. I think it's sort of pushing on the boundaries of what a hip-hop album is, to the point that I think it's kind of genreless, actually, at the end. I don't really think it has an obvious genre. And it's kind of got this really intense and troubling feel all the way through it. So it isn't an album for all the time. But interestingly, today, after I'd written my notes, I listened to it twice. And once I was sat on my own, just listening to the album, and the next time I was cooking, I was washing up, and the amount I enjoyed it while I was just sat listening to it compared to while it was in the background was quite eye-opening to me. That it's something you really have to listen to. I think the dark fascination of the album's obviously been added to by the sad death of one of the founding members while they were creating the album. But I think it does a bit of a disservice to focus on this too much, as I think he was involved in everything on the album, and the darkness was something that was already there prior to this. I think it was meant to be overwhelming. It was meant to feel dystopian. And I think it's really powerful without that sad backstory. I think it's a real reflection of like the last few years. So in the end, I think it was a really heavy, really emotionally raw, really sort of intense album. And I ended up really admiring it. Really, really think it's quite a special album, actually. So we'll go to Sam now to tell me why I'm wrong.
I'm not going to tell you why you're wrong, because I think that's kind of the point, is that I just really, really struggled to get on board with this. And I really, really tried, because it's definitely the most interesting of any of the music on this playlist. But whether that interesting means that I'd want to actively go back to it, I found myself actually dreading having to go back to it, because every time I'd be trying to listen to it and get something out of it, and I just couldn't. There's times when it feels like it never ever feels like they're rapping over the music that they're supposed to. It always sounds like there's like another band or another sound. Or I like that, Matt, you mentioned it kind of like reminded you of kind of like horror thriller kind of film stuff, because there's moments like there's a song Ground Zero. It literally sounds like there's a horror film playing in the background. Like, I don't know if that's a sample of something, but I can't tell if that's the intention or if it just happens to have aligned that way. And it made it so difficult to actually listen to what they're saying. I found that the lyrics get so obscured by some of the noise around it. And those droning sounds and the kind of just endless layers of other noise happening over the top of it. It never felt like the actual words were able to come through to me. So I found it really hard to even start to fathom what this was about. So yeah, I kind of don't understand who this album is for. Because, like you said, it doesn't really feel like a genre. It feels like it's completely on its own, completely unlike anything I've ever heard. But for me, it wasn't something that I would want to go back to. I tried over and over again to get something out of it, to find that bit of that made it way more interesting or way more kind of give me that feeling that I wanted, and it ended up that I just didn't want to go back to it every time it appeared. And I found that, and straight after that, or the Amyl and the Sniffers album, I just found that it was like an hour and a half of at the start of this playlist that I just didn't want to put on.
But so different, right? In the reasons why, I think
so different.
One's so straightforward and so to the point, and one's so obscure that.
Yeah, I would say that this is doing lots of things, and it's really you can tell that they're really, really trying to achieve this mood, this feeling, and no other album gives you any feeling like that in the way that this one does. So it's way more interesting than some of the other things on here. But I just found it impossible to get over that gap. It's so kind of so unintelligible at times, and difficult to get past. I don't know how many other people would be able to do that, to listen to this and go, I'm going to put the work in to get to that point. Yeah.
If we didn't have this on our playlist, then I would have given up on it, because there were so many times I listened to it, it took more than it gave back.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think if I hadn't heard the first album, I wouldn't have, given it. And obviously, it was on the playlist, so I would have. But I think if I'd just gone onto this one without hearing the first one, I probably wouldn't have got to where I did with it. But I think it's interesting because it's a lot of the time on this podcast when we disagree about an album, I can often not really fathom why the other person might think the way they do. But I totally get why people wouldn't enjoy this album and why people wouldn't want to listen to this album. But I think what something Sam said that was interesting was, I don't really get who it's for. I'm not usually a big fan of Needle Drop, but I watched his review of this, and what was interesting to me is he said this isn't for anyone. He basically said the idea that they're so far away from an act that's trying to create something that's going to hit a trend or that's going to sort of have a certain audience. They're just creating something that it feels like they've kind of enjoyed doing. And this all was born out of a DJ set that they did apparently, and it all just sort of was a very creative, very sort of jammy process rather than them actually sitting down and writing the songs. And I think I quite like that an act is creating an album that's not necessarily hitting for someone in particular or something in particular.
Yeah.
But I do totally understand why people can't listen to it, because it is a difficult listen, but an interesting one, I think. Yeah. That's my final point on Injury Reserve. But wow, so shall we playlist? Let's talk about the playlist. Sam, your first playlist as a stool. How does our new stool rate the playlist?
This was the worst playlist that I've had to listen to.
Welcome
on the podcast.
Nice to have you here.
Yeah, it just didn't. Genuinely, the only thing that I could see myself going back to is the Lil Nas X album, which we all seem to agree, and that was great. But there was nothing else here that remotely made me want to listen to it. So then, obviously, going back to the whole playlist, it felt like a bit of a slog to get through, if I'm honest.
Welcome to the team.
Yeah.
there's no point me asking what your favourite was because we all know. So we'll go to Matt. What did you think of the whole thing?
I like it. The playlist as a whole didn't really stir me. There's none of the albums I was like, yes, this is going to make it into my albums of the year list. The closest that got to that, like the 2 albums I actually enjoyed a lot, which was Amyl and the Sniffers and Lil Nas X. But I don't, compared to some of the other albums that I've really loved this year, they're not in the same league. I'll listen to them again, I think, maybe, but nothing beyond that.
Okay, well, for me, one of the best playlists we've had in quite a long time. I actually, because James in our WhatsApp group made a comment about it being our worst playlist. That made me go and look through our playlist and try and see how many playlists we've had that I thought were better than this playlist. And I would say maybe only 4 or 5 in the 47 episodes have been better than this. Injury Reserve and Karen Dalton, I thought were both exceptional. Amyl and the Sniffers I really enjoyed and will continue to listen to. And Lil Nas X, although not my cup of tea, like I enjoyed something that challenged me in that way. The only one that just can get in the bin completely was Cold War Kids. So I thought it was a great playlist. Which, it's nice to hear some disagreement because we've been accused recently of agreeing too much on this podcast. But I think things might change now. Things might change. Okay, shall I?
Yeah, it was very different.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting you to love it so much.
Yeah. Well, I did, and it was interesting because I don't think I did at first as well. I think that was what was interesting about this playlist. It was kind of a slow burner for me with some of the albums. The Karen Dalton and the
Karen Dalton
and the Injury Reserve both took a long time to sort of get me. I liked Amyl and the Sniffers straight away, but mainly because straight away I was like, Sam's going to hate this. And that cheered me up.
It's irresistible. We can just all agree on Cold War Kids. That was the worst.
Yes. Although, was it the worst for Sam?
I'd definitely rather listen to that than the other albums. Definitely. But that's not saying much. Please don't make me listen to any of this again, please.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like we might just do this playlist again straight away. Just see if we change our minds by next month.
Cold War Kids 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Special Cold War Kids episode.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to cheer us all up and talk about Roots Manuva. So this is our Why I Love section. This month I'm going to talk about Roots Manuva. When I was sort of writing my intro and writing down some notes, I couldn't decide whether I needed to talk about who Roots Manuva is before I start talking about why I love him, because I think there'll be a lot of listeners who know a hell of a lot more about Roots Manuva than I do. So I don't really want to embarrass myself in front of them by going into too much of his history. But on the other hand, I think some people might not even know his name, because I think he falls in this sort of space that maybe you have to be a certain age or into a certain type of music to know who he is. But so I'll give a little general intro. So Rodney Smith has been releasing music under the stage name of Roots Manuva since 1994. When I was 10, and you two, I don't think, were born. Or hadn't been born for very long. How old were you both in 94?
5.
I was 3.
Wow. Okay, so Roots Manuva released his first EP when you were 3, Sam. But yeah, he's largely considered as one of the pioneers of British hip hop. He launched his career when hip hop from this country was largely seen as a bit of a joke compared to American hip hop, really. And a lot of that was understandable, if I'm being honest. There was a comedic element to a lot of UK hip hop that would fall flat anywhere other than the UK, and sometimes other than the town that the artist was from. But around that time, Roots Manuva started to see some success. A bit later, probably in the late 90s, with his first 2 albums. And at that time, a lot of British rappers were trying to lean into their accents or lean into their local dialects to try and seem less like they were just trying to copy US hip hop and what had come before. And this was also around the time that I started to get into hip hop personally. So in reality, Roots Manuva has been a big part of getting me into one of my favourite genres. And he's one of the few artists in that genre that I have listened to right from the very start of my journey with that music. But the reason I connected with him back then, when I was sort of in my late teens and early 20s, was because of the rare way in which he seemed to take influence from US hip hop and mix it with a sort of sense of his own identity. there is something really British about his early music. He doesn't shy away from using words and lyrics that might not be understood elsewhere and terms that are very British. But he has the energy of US hip hop at that time. That's very present in his music. I was very much in my gangster rap stage at this point. I was listening to a lot of Tupac, a lot of Dre, a lot of NWA, a lot of Eminem, like that kind of music, Mobb Deep. And while my friends listened to a lot more UK hip hop, I couldn't really connect with a lot of it. It didn't have the same vitality as the US version for me. But Roots Manuva was the big exception. He had such a crossover value. And that was really hammered home for me when Charlie Tuna from Jurassic 5 featured on the song Join the Dots, which I've included on this playlist. That song blew my mind at the time. And I think the best thing about it is that Roots really showed that he deserved to share a mic with such a legendary rapper. Like, his verses are not outshone by Charlie Tuna. He lives with him all the way through that song. The album that song was on, Run Come Save Me, Roots Manuva's second album, was absolutely huge for me. And it's probably one of my most played albums of all time. So I included 4 songs from that album on my playlist. 3 of them, Dreamy Days, Join the Dots, and particularly Witness, One Hope, are probably in my top 20 hip-hop songs of all time. And I stayed on board with Roots Manuva until the next album, Awfully Deep. I remember seeing him in Sheffield around that time. It was an incredible show. But in the years between that and Slime and Reason, which came out in 2008, I kind of sort of fell out of love with hip-hop for a bit. There was a lot of stuff around that time, like 50 Cent and G-Unit and The Game, that just very much the misogynistic elements and the guns. I think as I was starting to understand the world a bit better, I kind of got put off by some of that. So in all honesty, other than returning to Run Come Save Me quite regularly, I'd kind of decided at that time that Roots Manuva was a bit done. I'd occasionally hear something about him, but never really went back that regularly. Then I don't know if you guys remember, but during lockdown, I did a challenge on our Twitter where I was listening to the full discographies of different artists that I felt I should be more into, and one of them was Roots Manuva. His discography was the best one I listened to during that challenge. There's not a bad album among them, and there's barely a bad song, to be honest, for me. But what blew me away more than anything was listening to his most recent album, Bleeds, which came out in 2015. So this was an artist who I'd kind of written off as having released their best music, close to 2 decades ago. But here they were releasing this exceptional album, which was also quite a left turn in a way in terms of the experimentalism within it. So he'd worked with the likes of sort of Fortet on this album and was creating something much more expansive and kind of oddball. So discovering this album really reignited my love for Roots Manuva and made him not just a one album artist for me. There was always 3 albums I liked, but I thought he was sort of a one special album. But having spent a lot of time over the last year with his whole discography, I think he's probably up there with my favorite hip hop artists of all time. I think he's just had an exceptional career, and I don't think it's over yet. I think there's more to come. But that's all I've really got to say. But before I sort of hear from you what you guys thought of the playlist and what you think of his music in general, I'd love to know a bit about how much you knew him, and if you knew of him at all. So should we go to Sam first?
Yeah, sure. I had knew the name Roots Manuva, but it's so weird to me that I have absolutely no memory of listening to any music from him before. I wouldn't have been able to tell you the name of a song. And also, it was weird that I thought someone who's so integral to like British hip hop through like the 90s through to the 2000s, I'd have come across him featuring on something else that I'd have listened to. But I guess his stuff is sort of the precursor to then grime kind of becoming a thing and then being the defining thing. Because if you think of like Dizzy Rascal, that was like 2003, wasn't it? So it's probably just before that those early albums. So maybe that's why, is that it was just a bit before me catching up to that sort of music. So I didn't really have any expectations going in. But I quite enjoyed most of it. I would say I enjoyed the first half more than the second half. Probably for the same reasons you were saying about kind of really getting into it at the time, and the later stuff does seem way more kind of out there and experimental and maybe a different sound. So at first I was a bit frustrated that you'd put it just in order of the release, but I can see why you did that, because it's really interesting that his sound, the first couple of songs, sound completely different. It's like a completely different artist to that latest album, which you can tell that he's influenced by so many different types of music, not just hip hop, but you can hear influences from everywhere. So to be able to see that range and get that kind of journey through it, I felt like that really worked when listening to the playlist. So yeah, I really, really liked the songs you mentioned earlier from that second album. Like Witness was the standout for me across all of those songs. It felt like a song that I'd heard loads, even though I have no memory of actually hearing it. It just felt like an instant classic. But yeah,
I'd be surprised if you've not heard it on
totally.
It's everywhere. Especially with, I know your partner watches a lot of Match of the Day, and it's probably on Match of the Day. Even now, it's still every now and then pops up on there, so you will have heard it. Yeah.
But yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I feel like I'm gonna go and listen to some of those first few albums to really dive into it properly. Because what I heard, I really enjoyed.
Brilliant. Yeah, Run Come Save Me, I would say I could have just put that album forward. If it hadn't been for Bleeds coming out when it did, I might well have done that. But it's, but yeah, just to comment on the chronological order, there wasn't really any. The main reason I did that is because Nick left the podcast, and I had to put together a playlist at the last minute because he was going to do the What I Love, so I just quickly shoved them in order. So there was no thinking really there. But
I feel like it worked with kind of the journey that he's clearly been on.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. I think sometimes it does, doesn't it? Chronological makes sense when someone has changed throughout their career. But no, I'm glad you enjoyed some of it. What about you, Matt? I know you knew him a little bit better than Sam.
Yeah, I knew him a little bit. I was familiar with the second album, Run Don't Change, and I forget the album name, Slime, because I did something similar to you, Slime and Reason. I did something similar to you maybe a couple of years ago, where I just trawl through Spotify and be like, I don't know this artist well enough, but I know their name, so I'll add a couple of their albums to a playlist and listen to it. And I have several of the songs that you picked out as liked on my Spotify. And of it, we've talked about Witness. Witness, I knew even before that because it was massive, and it is that squelchy beat is just so it feels iconic and has been everywhere, and it's just so good. And then, it was really interesting here you talk about the contrast between American and British hip hop, and at the time, because when I started listening to this was later, because my hip hop years came later, and it was probably when you were falling out of love with hip hop, and so my reference point for American hip hop was not very good. Yeah. And so this to me was always bigger, weightier, and more atmospheric, less disposable. And so it stuck with me a lot more than a lot of the American style hip hop that I was listening to, or that I'd heard around. I haven't listened to this in a while, but it was really nice to dip back into those tracks and then get introduced to a bunch more that I hadn't listened to, because I pretty much stuck to those two albums. Yeah. And I think, one thing we haven't mentioned is his voice. His voice is just, it's so unique and so deep and so gravelly. It has so much gravitas to it that he could be bad at what he does and it would still be listenable, because it has so much of that weight attached to it. But he isn't bad; he's pretty good as well, and so it makes it something that's really, really enjoyable to listen to. And then, as Sam was saying, the chronological order, I really enjoyed listening to him through time, because he has evolved a lot, and he's taking all these influences, but he's also following the trajectory of British hip hop as well, and probably instructing it at the same time, because it becomes more minimal, it becomes less atmospheric and becomes more akin to like the grimy stuff we're listening to. But then he's still making some of these bigger, like I forget what the last track is, but I think it maybe has James Blake on it.
I can't remember the name of it now off the top of my head. But I know which one you mean.
Yeah, and that is so, it's like it feels very now and new, but it also feels so like sounds so Roots Manuva-y at the same time. So yeah, now I want to listen to some of the other albums as well, especially the debut.
Yeah, the debut is great. It is the most straightforward album, but it is great. It's just very much sort of someone finding their sound, I think, in a way. But it's interesting, I think, to think about a couple of the comments that you've both made. I think, Sam, when you said that you've not heard him on any features, this guy's featured. I could have done a playlist of songs that he's the feature artist on, and at first I had included a few because he's done songs with Cinematic Orchestra, Left Field, Chemical Brothers. He's done a song with Gorillaz. I don't like Gorillaz. I was
going to say, yeah.
He's on all sorts, and also nearly every album he's brought out, and this Sam mentioned in the different genres, he's done like a dub version of the album. So we've got sort of dub Come Save Me and sort of more reggae influenced versions of his album. So he has been all over the place and done all sorts of different things. It was really quite hard to condense into this playlist. There's even one album, Forever Revolution, that I didn't put a track on the end, even though that album's great. It's just that there's stuff I wanted to include from all the other albums. So if there was some stuff there for you, which it sounds like there was, I would recommend diving into some of that stuff as well, because particularly the song he did with Cinematic Orchestra is fantastic, but it's about 11 minutes long, so I thought I was taking the piss a bit by adding that on to this playlist. But no, glad you both enjoyed some of it, and that's Roots Manuva, I think.
Awesome.
Okay.
Good stuff.
So that's us. So on to next time. But well done, Sam, for getting through an entire episode and entire playlist that you hated. And
my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.
Better.
Yeah. So what have we got next? You're hosting, aren't you, Matt? So what are you bringing to us next time?
Okay, so the classic album is going to be Boards of Canada with Music Has the Right to the Children. And then I'm going to be... so we'll see. Then I'm going to be introducing everyone, and probably people know him already, to Paul Weller.
Paul Weller.
A playlist across all his various guises.
Okay, cool. So I've got the two new releases I've picked are Skin by Joy Crooks and Lonely Guest by Lonely Guest. What have you got, Sam?
Cool.
And I have picked Optimist by Phineas and Pins and Needles by Natalie Hemby.
Okay. So Sam gets to start stamping his country tones onto
we're going all in. Yeah. It's
Cool. Right. Okay, listeners. Well, check us out at pickybees.com, pickybs.com, with a whole host of things that isn't just us talking. And find us on Twitter at pickybastards, capital B, capital B. And see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.